morning, everyone. And thanks very much to Anna and Windrose for having me here. And it's great that the weather's held off for a little while. So I'm Jess Beckerling. I'm the convener of WA Forest Alliance. I live up the road in North Walpole, and I've been involved in forest conservation and other environmental work in the southwest since the late 1990s. I'd first like to acknowledge that we're here on Noongar Budja and pay my respects to Noongar elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that when we're talking and thinking about resistance, that it's First Nations people here in the southwest and around Australia and the world who understand the need for resistance and have been struggling with resistance for many generations. So Anna's asked me to talk about biodiversity today, the very stuff of life and the protection of habitat. So I've been thinking about this wonderful topic and how to talk about it and think about it in the context of resistance and in the context of the other speakers that are organised for today. And I'm sure that you're all very aware that the globe is experiencing the sixth major extinction event that we've experienced over the last several hundred millions of years. And of course, the other profound crisis that we're experiencing is the climate crisis. And these two are intrinsically linked and they go back to the same root causes. And I think the chances that we have of turning them around rest on the same hopes. And obviously that comes back very much to resistance and how we go about it. So I'm going to focus on biodiversity and ecology, knowing that Rod and others are going to discuss climate later on. We're living in a remarkable period of human evolution. I think it's true to say that every generation of humans have faced some sort of existential threat, whether it was a Great War or the Great Depression, famine, the invasion of their country. But there's a couple of things that really separate the threat that we're facing now from ones that we've faced before. One of them is that it crosses all boundaries. There aren't continents that aren't going to experience it. There aren't corners of the globe that aren't going to experience it. The other is that our political leaders and the majority of the people that we're sharing the planet with are pretending that nothing is happening. So thinking about the extinction threat and what we know we need to do and why we're not doing anything about it at a sufficient level, what comes to mind for me is that we have grown up with this background noise of extinction. We've grown up hearing that our favourite bear or mammal or bird is endangered, is at risk of extinction. And it's as if there's been a smoke alarm going in the background the whole time and we've learnt to block it out. But the house is on fire. There is a fire smouldering in the woodwork and behind the plasterboard. And the walls are warming up. And the smoke is getting thicker. But we've developed this collective pathology to keep our adrenaline down, to keep our despair at bay. And now we have to face this reality collectively of whether we continue to allow that pathology to grow and develop, or if we face the threat with our full attention, allow those feelings of despair and anger and fear to grow within us in order to be able to get to the peak of that feeling and come down the other side knowing that together we can do something about it. That's really our challenge right now, I think, and why it's so important that we have these sorts of festivals, these sorts of conversations, because all of us here, I'm sure, have our own experiences of environmental crises, of social crises. We understand climate change, we understand what's happening around us with salinity or loss of biodiversity, all the various things that are happening in our immediate corner of the world. And if you're like me, you're experiencing a feeling of being in a parallel universe because you wake up in the morning like I did a few weeks ago. It was the 6th of June and there was a hot wind coming from the north and there was a serious risk of fire that day in North Walpole on the 6th of June. It should have been raining for 6 weeks. And I could feel so tangibly the reality of climate change, not the theory and the science, but the reality right in my face with that warm wind at the wrong time of the year. And I went into town and the people still had their burn piles going with the wind whipping them around and people were walking down the street as if nothing was happening. And I felt like there was a disconnect between my understanding of what was going on in front of me and what was going on for me, for my community around me. And that can be a really difficult sensation for us to live with. But I want to say that I think we're up for the challenge. I think we have the intelligence, we have the creativity, we have the resilience, and we have the technology that we need to step ourselves into this next chapter of humanity's evolution. The challenge that we have is deciding to take that step, deciding to let go of the comforts that we surround ourselves with, that another generation, another person, another political leader, someone who's better at public speaking, someone who's better at organising events. We all have to do this. We all have to take on this challenge ourselves. So let me bring this back into the context of what I know, which is forest conservation, which for me has been a largely positive journey. I got involved when I was 18, spent 3 years in the old growth forest blockades from 1997 to 2001. And it was, you know, an incredibly harrowing experience in a lot of ways, and I still have very visceral memories of huge old trees hitting the mud and forests that we were defending being destroyed around us. But what I remember most of all, and what I still keep with me, is the community that we established through that time. My very best, dearest, closest friends have, you know, were developed. Our friendships were developed in those times, and the fact, obviously, that we had an incredible success at the end of that process. In 2001, we protected 230,000 hectares of old growth forest, which is the biggest win that there has been Australia-wide. Obviously, I don't take credit for that. It was done by an incredible diversity and number of people over many, many decades. The problem we still face now, many generations of activist groups since then, is that we're still facing old growth logging. And the reason that's happening is because the definition that was written to define old growth forest at that time was written in such a way that it would reduce the amount of forest that had to be protected. You can imagine that the people working in these agencies who are ideologically committed to ongoing logging of old growth forests would have been working day and night to work out a way that they could keep logging old growth forests but tell everybody that they weren't. So they did a very good job of that, and they wrote a definition that said in the carry that even if you come across one stump, you've been walking through an old growth forest with ancient carry and marry trees, nesting hollows for black cockatoos, all of the full suite of flora and fauna, all of the ages of the trees, and you eventually come across one stump, and it might have been cut down by two blokes with a crosscut saw 100 years ago, but that one stump disqualifies that whole patch of forest you've been walking through from old growth status, and it can now be clearfelled. So that's what we're dealing with right now in Lewin. When I leave here, I'm going past a blockade that we established 3 weeks ago in Lewin, just outside of Manjimup, and going through to a fundraiser at Fair Harvest. And those guys at Fair Harvest in Margaret River were part of building the platforms that were going in the trees in the 1990s. So, you know, there's this link all the way through the community that still exists here and right up through the southwest, still fighting for the forests. And we mustn't forget that we did achieve an incredible amount, but after those sorts of achievements, there's a requirement for people to stay vigilant and to keep fighting. So with a nod to resistance and to non-violent direct action, we've been fighting for these forests over the last several years, and only when we set up this blockade 3 weeks ago in Lewin did the loggers pull out, and they haven't returned. And we've now heard from the Forestry Minister that they don't have any plans to return to that area, at least until the end of winter, but what we're hearing quietly is that they probably won't come back at all. And that's the power of people coming together. I should also acknowledge that Diane Evers, member for the Southwest for the Greens, is here. And this work, and of course the always honourable Giz Watson, who was the member for the Greens for 16 years in Perth, this work that's done at a grassroots level has to also resonate through Parliament House. So when the fires are burning in the forest, people come there. There's a magnetic pull that comes from direct action, that comes from resistance. The Extinction Rebellion movement, that's only been around for less than a year, has already attracted extraordinary momentum. And they've put together research that shows that in any resistance, whether you're talking about toppling a dictator or dealing with the climate crisis, you only need 3% of your population to join the resistance. That's totally manageable. It's just that people need to understand that that's the goal. we are part of that 3%. And if we don't stand up, what's the chances of other people doing so? So look, I'll leave it there in acknowledgement that there's a lot of people here who've got a lot of experience and knowledge, technical skill and information about biodiversity.